Okay, it is now 9 o'clock and good morning and welcome to everyone to our webinar this morning on addressing destructive deployment practices in local government. My name is Fatima Rawat. I'm a subject matter expert at the Ethics Institute and part of the project team for the Local Government Anti-Corruption, Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, also known as LGELI. LGELI is a partnership project between the Ethics Institute, the National Department of Cooperative Governance, the South African Local Government Association, and the Moral Regeneration Movement. It is a collaborative project aimed at, the objective of LGELI is to inform the development of a code for for governance for local government in South Africa. This is a very critical conversation, one of the many critical conversations that we need to be having as a country. And it's very timely that we have this opportunity to engage in this discussion. Some housekeeping before we get into the actual webinar this morning. You are in a webinar, which means that you don't have access to your mics or to your cameras. However, we do encourage you to make the session as interactive as possible. So please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen for any comments that you might have. And then please use the Q&A function for any questions that you might have to our panelists this morning. We will be keeping a close eye on the Q&A panel, and we will raise your questions with the panelists as we proceed with this morning's session. We will also be using Mentimeter as a purpose to engage with you. So there are two ways in which you're able to engage with Mentimeter. Type Mentimeter into your browser and put in the code and you will find the questions there. Or alternatively, you can use the QR code on the right hand side and just scan your phone on it and you'd be able to pop the questions there. We will also, thank you for the question, you will also have access to the recording at the end of the webinar. We will send it to you, so please know that you will receive that via email from us later. We have a very exciting lineup for you today, so let's have a quick look at the agenda. We're going to start with an introduction and an opening and welcome by Advocate Kolisile Kanyile. And then we're going to have a little bit of an introduction to locate you into the research that's already been conducted thus far. And then we're going to move straight into a panel discussion with our political parties. And we're very fortunate to have the political parties with us this morning. And at that point, we will pause after the panel discussion to take your questions. And then we'll look at a government regulatory response from COCTA, followed by a panel discussion, which would be a response from civil society. And then we'll pause again for your questions before we close. We've got a really exciting lineup for you, and the agenda is really hoping that through these discussions, we're able to engage quite fruitfully and have a constructive conversation around this very topical issue of addressing destructive deployment practices in local government with a view towards addressing the challenges we face around ethical leadership in local government. We would really encourage you to please engage in the session constructively and fruitfully so that we're able to get to the nub of the issues and have a firm sense of how we move forward so that we can inform a code for ethical governance for local government, which is the objective of the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative. Without any further ado, I'd like to call on the respected Advocate Kolisile Kanyile to please come onto screen. Advocate, good morning.
Good morning, colleagues.
Morning.
Morning,
Advocate.
Fatima.
Morning, morning, Advocate. If I can, please, colleagues, introduce Advocate Kanyile to everybody. Advocate Kanyile is the co-chair of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy Reference Group. And we're very fortunate, Advocate, to have you with us on screen this morning. Advocate, I don't see, there you are. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Ma'am, can I hand over to you to do the opening and welcome for us this morning?
Thank you, Fatima.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, participants. I would like to make use of this opportunity to welcome you to the Ethics Institute webinar addressing destructive deployment strategic practices in local government. In particular, I would like to welcome the members of the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative Advisory Committee, the various political parties present, government agencies and civil society organizations who have all answered the call to discuss and address the distraction left by the appointment of unqualified municipal officials based on political connections rather than skills, which ultimately undermines ethical leadership. Your interest, willingness to contribute to and participate in this local government ethical leadership initiative is the first step in a long and exceptionally important road to fighting and combating the corruption and unethical practices, which ultimately results from the appointment of unqualified municipal officials based on their political affiliations instead of on their merit. According to destructive deployment practices, addressing the destructive deployment practices in local government is an important and much overdue conversation in our country. I'm happy that you are having it today. Ethical leadership is the cornerstone of every democracy, and the threat posed by inappropriate deployment continues to pose significant risk to the growth of the South African economy and the country as a whole. Local government is one of the key areas of service delivery, and we all know that. There is a wide-scale agreement that local government is not operating as it should. Maladministration becomes the norm and is based on factionalism and politicization and proves to be ineffective. A lack of accountability by those entrusted to deliver and serve the communities almost always results in these municipalities becoming vulnerable and susceptible to abuse and eventually dysfunctional and failing at all levels. In his foreword to the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, President Cyril Ramaphosa had this to say, open quote, "All South Africans who are serious about eliminating corruption in our country will welcome this National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Corruption, whenever it occurs, represents a decline in our value system as a nation. If left unchecked, it poses a grave threat to our democratic values and our dream of becoming an ethical and developmental state. Corruption is committed by individuals who are driven by greed, who steal state business and civil society resources that are intended to grow our economy, eliminate poverty, and ensure the achievement of development outcomes. The National Anti-Corruption Strategy is a necessary response to this problem," close quote. In aligning ourselves with the President's vision of our country, one of the first steps in ensuring that local government is ensuring that local government appointments are based on merit, only merit and skills. Inappropriate deployment is the antithesis. In aligning ourselves with the President's vision for our country, one of the first steps in ensuring that local government appointments are based on merit and only merit and skills. Inappropriate deployment is the antithesis of this vision of ethical leadership. The National Anti-Corruption Strategy Diagnostic Report identified some government departments or sectors more prone to corruption than others. One of the sectors considered most vulnerable and susceptible to abuse is that of local government, who pose a high risk or specific vulnerability to the manifestation of corruption and unethical practices or activities. The National Anti-Corruption Strategy reiterates South Africa's commitment to eradicate all corrupt activities and confirms that the national strategy is further supported by, amongst others, the Public Service Anti-Corruption Strategy and the Local Government Anti-Corruption Strategy. The Local Government Anti-Corruption Strategy has three strategic objectives: promoting community ownership, strengthening municipalities' resilience against corruption, and building trust and accountability through effective investigation and resolution. The inclusion of the local government anti-corruption strategy in the development of the national anti-corruption strategy speaks to the significance of addressing efforts aimed at establishing ethical leadership at local government. Some of the key outcomes envisioned in the national anti-corruption strategy relating to local government practices are reformed recruitment and appointment regimes for public servants and local government administrators, especially senior appointments, synergy with and support for the implementation of the local government anti-corruption strategy. Local government plays a key role in service delivery. I'm repeating this. As co-chair of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, I can say unequivocally that the local government ethical leadership initiative fits comfortably within the realm of the vision and mandate of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. The ethos of the initiative lends its support to the National Anti-Corruption Strategy and the local government anti-corruption strategy. But to ensure its success, what is required is a whole of society approach. This approach requires us to work collectively, collaboratively, to engage with each other, discuss best practices, propose solutions to complex problems, and ensure a healthy, successful country. This is an approach endorsed by the President. Taking into account the severe destruction brought upon by damaging deployment practices and its impact in our beautiful country, one of the aims of this webinar is to have a whole of society dialogue to explore the topic further and consult on governance solutions with the intention of developing a much needed code for ethical governance for South African local government. Your attendance today is pivotal and plays an important role in shaping an ethical framework for local government by reviewing and aligning the current practices through your participation in this webinar and sharing your insights and experiences, which will no doubt prove invaluable in our common fight to make South Africa safe and corruption-free. A strong commitment from all parties involved is required to ensure a successful conclusion and outcome of this initiative. I wish you a very productive and fruitful engagement today, and I would like to thank all the participants who have taken the time out of their schedule to attend and participate in this vital session. I thank you. Thanks, Kamini, Fatima.
Thank you, Advocate, for that warm words of introduction, and most importantly, for placing this morning's critical conversation in the context of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, as well as the Local Government Anti-Corruption Strategy. Thank you also, Advocate, for staying with us for the course of the morning. We appreciate your time. Colleagues, if you've just joined us, good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar on destructive deployment practices in local government. It is hosted by the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, which is a partnership project between the Ethics Institute, the National Department of Cooperative Governance, the South African Local Government Association, and the Model Regeneration Movement. If you have just joined us, we will be sharing a recording of the session. We will also be taking notes of your questions and answers, so please pop your Q&As in the questions and answer sessions at the bottom of your screen and your comments on the chat function at the bottom. We're also making use of Mentimeter for engagement purposes. You can see it on your screen in front of you, so please do tap that into your browser or take your smartphone and scan it over the QR code, and you'll find a set of questions that will pop up that we'd like to engage you on. By way of introduction now, and to locate you into the research that has been conducted thus far on the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, I'd like to call on my colleague Chris Dobie to come on screen, please. Chris is going to set the context and share with you the rich findings that we have from the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative. Chris is the Manager Organizational Ethics at the Ethics Institute, and as well as the Project Champion for the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative. Chris, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Fatima, and thank you to everybody for being here. If I can invite you, we do have a little poll, as Fatima has said, going on Mentimeter. So if you just scan in that QR code or put in, go to menti.com and put in this little code 616 18087. Fatima, if you can maybe put it in the chat, just 616-18087. All right. I want to talk to you just about what the research findings were from the local government ethical leadership initiative. And yeah, the local government ethical leadership initiative, as Fatima has said, is a partnership between COGTA, SOLGA, Moral Regeneration Movement, and ourselves at the Ethics Institute. And we want to facilitate a national dialogue on ethical leadership in local government with a purpose in at the end of next year to come up with a code for ethical governance in South Africa. So it really is a governance code for municipalities that deals with issues related to ethical leadership and things that undermine ethical leadership. So as part of that, our process, we've been putting up our governance structures up to September last year. And then in the past year, we've been spending on a research dialogue, which has predominantly been in provincial engagements where we've had focus groups and interviews in the provinces. We've had about 4 focus groups per province with councillors, with senior municipal officials, and then also with civil society. After that, we also did a survey amongst municipal officials and councillors to get a better sense of how representative the views are from our provincial engagement. So it was quite a rigorous research process, and I'm going to give you just some of the themes that came from that research process. But one of the key questions we asked was, what undermines ethical leadership in local government? What makes it difficult to lead ethically in local government? Some of the key findings that we had was, firstly, the politicization of local government. Secondly, lack of councillor competence, which is a very interesting one and one that we might discuss in future. Then the impunity and lack of accountability that we see in local government. And lastly, where things go really wrong. So this is, and again, to say that not all of this is in all municipalities, but it is pretty much a theme that you see coming out quite frequently. But criminal capture, where things go really wrong, where it's about supply chain management, abuse, and politics of the stomach. The thing that we want to talk today about today is the improper deployment practices that very much leads to the politicization of local governments, very strongly linked to that. It's sort of the avenue by which it happens in municipalities. So today we've got a consultation dialogue. So it's in the next year, we're going to have a few of these dialogues going forward on thematic areas. And as we said, the thematic area for today is then the deployment practices. Now, if we talk about the deployment practices, what our word cloud of the top 20 issues shows us is that it's very much about lack of skills, lack of understanding, lack of education, lack of knowledge, and lack of experience that people mention in response to cadre deployment. Sometimes you do it with the cadre, sometimes without, but we can see that it's very much around those issues. So yeah, let me give you a sense of what the narrative is that's coming through, and also to point out that this is only part of the very complex picture that is local government. Yeah, we're not going to solve all the skills issues that we have by solving deployment issues. It's a big complex picture, and this is one lens through which to look at it. In an ideal situation, you've got your community, your political, and your administrative parts of local government. What happens in practice is that the council has a big arm into the administration of local government, and there's a big doorway that opens up by the fact that they can appoint the municipal manager and the Section 56 managers. So for those of you not familiar with the terminology, that's basically your senior management or your exco in local government. So what happens frequently is that we see the deployment of inappropriate people into those positions based on political affiliation rather than skills. So that's the one part of the story. Another part of the story that comes through is that you also have your political party regional and local branches. And we also frequently find that people from there are deployed or appointed into the administration in various positions. Frequently, it is the municipal manager. So in other words, you've got a very senior political party person as a municipal manager, and sometimes that person outweighs the mayor in seniority. And clearly all of these things create challenges in accountability and the power balance within the administration, as well as council. So we then also see that the deployment, as it is called, is going down a lot further in the administration than purely at the strategic level. So purely, if we look at deployment practices, it's said to be at a strategic level, but it goes down all the way to the clerical level. And I've even once had someone say to me that they deploy the cleaners in the municipality as well. And all of that then does beg the question, is deployment abused for patronage politics? So in other words, it's not really deployment anymore. It's now something else completely, but we still use the word deployment to, I suppose, to make it more palatable. The other thing that happens is when there's misconduct. We see that, let's say that this person is now accused of misconduct of one form or the other, or has been engaged in misconduct. It's very difficult for the municipal manager to apply discipline. They're accountable to council, but they're also accountable to these people who are their political seniors. If the municipal manager is one of these deployed people, they might be the political senior of people in council again. So it's difficult for council to provide the oversight that they need to provide over people who are their political seniors, and it's difficult for managers to provide oversight of people who are their political seniors. So what we see is a big breakdown in discipline and accountability, and we then see that a lot of people are abusing this for their own purposes, and we see a breakdown of the governance processes. So the two big themes that come out, firstly, lack of skills, that leads to management weakness and impacts on service delivery, also governance, and it opens up the municipalities to corrupt elements. But the other thing that's very important is the politicians as officials, where your junior is now your political senior. That also leads to politically untouchable employees and a lack of accountability. So how we've seen this then in the quantitative survey, so the survey that we did in municipalities, we asked people, to what extent do you agree that the following undermines ethical leadership in your municipality? And we give you here the data as it shows between the adverse or disclaimer audits and the unqualified and clean audits. And people, you can see here that appointment of officials with political connections rather than skills is one of the highest areas here. And the difference between an unqualified and clean audit and adverse and disclaimer audit is quite large. Also, lack of education, skills, and qualifications amongst officials, where you have adverse and disclaimer audits, is a lot larger than in unqualified clean audits. Unlawful instructions, also interference from political party branches in council and appointment of political party office bearers in the administration are all big issues that come through and are more severe in more dysfunctional municipalities. So to wrap up, I just want to show you two quick quotes. Firstly, this is by a political administrative leader, saying people are appointed in the appointment of staff, there's clear criteria and credentials. Politicians then push people in their positions for political reasons. This creates a problem. In the administration, you have people who are qualified to do their jobs and those who are there to push for a political agenda. Those who are there for an agenda don't adhere to the policies. They create chaos, and they always have the upper hand in terms of politics. So things happen despite what you say is the policy and process. They undermine the processes. They always get away with it because they are protected. So this is from our research, just some quotes. And here, finally, all I want to point out is this last bit that says, to attract a pool of good talent, especially in faculties like finance and technical. Currently, the message to new talent is that the doors are closed because of deployment practices. So that is just a brief overview of the narrative that comes out from the research. I also want to show you just how the Menti poll has unfolded. Let's see there, we've had 33 people participate so far. And people very much say current deployment practices are destructive to municipal governance. The term deployment is abused for patronage politics, very strongly done. And slightly more doubt about whether deployment can in fact be done ethically. We see quite a few people say, yes, it can be done ethically, some doubtful and some saying, no, it can't be done ethically. And let me leave it there and hand it back over to Fatima for the conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And we will drop Chris's email into the comment box. If you would like to know more about the research that's being conducted and about the project itself, please don't hesitate to call out and reach out to us at the Ethics Institute. We'll be more than keen to share more around the project that we're doing. Thank you very much, Chris. I'd now like to kindly request Mr. Rolf Meyer to please come onto screen. So we're now going to step it up a gear and move on to the first of our panel discussions. Mr. Meyer, thank you very much for joining us this morning and for hosting our panel discussion with the political parties. And as I also would like to invite the political parties to please come on screen as I introduce Mr. Meyer. By way of introduction, Mr. Meyer is a member of the Local Government Ethical Leadership Advisory Committee. He's also the co-founder of the In Transformation Initiative, which is an NGO focusing on international peace processes, and the former Minister of Constitutional Development and Provincial Affairs in the 1994 Government of National Unity. Mr. Meyer, thank you for joining us this morning and for facilitating the conversation with the political parties. I'm going to hand over to you now, Mr. Meyer, to introduce your guest and to facilitate the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatima, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this program today and to facilitate this very important session. Thank you very much for that. We are running a little bit behind time, I see. So let us get into the business immediately of discussing the subjects at the hand. We have three participants in our panel this morning. The first is the Honorable Chesa Sanoli, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, and also a member of the ANC National Executive Committee on a subcommittee on legislature and governance. Then we have Dr. Leon Schreiber, who is a member of the National Assembly on behalf of the DA, and he is the DA's Shadow Minister for Public Service and Administration. And then we have from the EFF, the Honorable Kanya Chesa, the member of the National Assembly, also serving as an alternate member of the Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. To our three panelists, welcome, and we are very happy that you could join this important discussion. There are two questions that have been put to us. The first is, what is your party's official position on the question of deployment? And the second is, in the light of what is being stated inter alia through the research that Chris has referred to, and general perceptions that might exist, also coming out already from the survey that is running, what is your view on how deployment can be addressed to correct the image that exists and or the details of deployment giving bad effect to proper governance in the country? So over to our panelists. I'm going to give you 5 minutes each on both questions and then have an interactive discussion following that. So, Honourable Deputy Speaker, over to you first, please.
Thank you very much, Rolf, and good to see you after a long time, except in broadsheets and so on. Yeah, I appreciate the invitation for us to talk to this question of deployment. And many of us present on this webinar would be aware that the President was recently at the state of capture inquiry and made certain remarks himself and the chairperson of the African National Congress, Guedemantas, on the historical and documented policies around what is referred to as cadre development and cadre deployment. practices in the pledge that each of us have to sign as ANC members. It's an undertaking not to place the organization into disrepute and not to join the organization for pecuniary reasons. In other words, to be able to earn something or anything of that sort. And recently in the local government processes towards elections, candidates had to sign an additional pledge to undertake to stop corruption, to stop fraud and patronage. Now, we have an expression in Sesotho that says, meaning berries do not ripen according to the wishes of the monkey. Now, advocate at the beginning of this session referred to what the president said, but basically articulating the necessity for us to treat public resources appropriately and so on. That's our general approach and so on. But Rolf, I want to suggest that in attempts to stick to this guidance inside the organization, there have been tragic consequences. I would like to dedicate my remarks to Jimmy Mohlala, the former speaker of Mbombela municipality, who was killed ostensibly for having tried to stop corrupt practices at that municipality during the 2010 thing. In KwaZulu-Natal, Sam Soul of Amabungani, interviewing a writer of a book called War Party, says he asked the victims, or rather, Sam Soul wanted to know, is this the end of the ANC in this province? And the writer says, no, because the people I interviewed were ANC members who were victims of these killings, who themselves were saying they are fighting to reclaim their organization from some wrong individuals who are in its ranks. So in practice, this is a very critical element to recognize. Okay, this 109-year-old has lots of experiences of very prominent leadership who has many interesting ethical conduct in their practices to learn from. And part of what we are doing is to deal with this educationally. So we have a school, Oliver Tambo School of Leadership, to be able to deal with some of these issues in order those who come in have a requirement for getting into place. In the overall, this educational initiative internally links to what we refer to as renewal. In other words, in recognition that our resolutions on these matters have been poorly implemented. This is why often it leads to problematic implementation on the ground with poor supervision. And so our view is that this question about ethical conduct and is both a function of the environment in which we are operating. There are very strong corrupting influences, and in the recent practices, strong actions have called on the community to agree that a candidate is appropriate for selection. That's a very important mechanism for dealing with these problems. But in addition to that, that those who go through the cracks, so to speak, as we speak, some of them have just been asked to step aside, who failed to do so when they were asked in the past that if you are charged, if there's problematic stuff with you, you can't continue to serve in the area of responsibility. And this has been a very important development as far as we are concerned, because it says we are increasing the tempo for supervising actively the implementation of what has always existed in our publications. So that is the one thing that we say is going to rebuild our relationship with people who are our masters as far as we are concerned as the African National Congress.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Spot on in terms of time, and thank you for your introductory comments. Leon, if we can go to you now, next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good morning also to the colleagues and to the Deputy Speaker. So let me jump straight into these two questions that we were asked to address. Just as a preliminary remark, I think we have to distinguish conceptually between a couple of things. The first is the the democratic process and the fact that political parties put up candidates who voters then vote for, as well as certain positions which are defined in terms of legislation as political appointments. That's one subject. And then the other subject where the problem really does come in is the appointment of politically motivated persons into the civil service, into the public administration. So it's not necessarily about candidate selection. It is about the deployment of people politically who should not be politically deployed, who should be professionally appointed. I think global experience shows us that merit-based appointments in the public service are really the only way that you eventually get to the capable state that we all want. And it is true that South Africa is not unique in suffering under this system where officials who are supposed to be professionals are appointed on the basis of politics. But what is rather unique is that the governing party actually gave this practice a name and very publicly declared in 1997 the practice of cadre deployment. And there are some quite startling quotes, if you read it from the context of 2021, about how this was designed to capture levers of power within the state. So this was very much a formal decision to reduce or erase the separation between the party and the state, and therefore it created a system. And when we talk about solutions, ethics and individual examples and implementation are not going to be enough to fix a systemic problem. And so the position of the DA is that state capture and corruption are features of cadre deployment. They are not a bug. They are actually features of a system designed to erase the separation between party and state. Of course, you have national, provincial, and regional deployment committees according to the ANC's policy position, which means it affects all three spheres of government. So the DA's position is that we have very vociferously opposed cadre deployment since it was implemented in 1997. There's a famous analysis by James Myberg, who worked for the DA back then, called All Power to the Party. And it really is quite striking to read his sort of forecast as to what cadre deployment would do to the state now that we have been through this era of state capture. I think that, you know, in terms of the effects, I think that's been very nicely outlined by Chris, and I thank him for his research in how it actually weakens capacity in the state, because you end up appointing people not on the ability to do the job, but on the basis of loyalty or other kind of political interest that is being promoted. I think the single most important question, Mr. Mayor, that we have to answer also as we grapple with this question in the context of state capture is how were the people who captured the state appointed to those positions in the first place? I think that is a fundamental question we have to grapple with. And certainly in my interpretation of the evidence we've seen in front of the State Capture Commission, the question is answered by pointing to the practice of cadre deployment. We have to understand that getting people recruited and appointed in the correct way is really where we start turning things around. So I think where there could perhaps be a bit of a constructive disagreement today is that the DA rejects and opposes cadre deployment in all its forms. We don't think it can be refined or improved. And where we govern, certainly municipalities and in the province, there is no such thing as a cadre deployment committee. The government, the responsible executives in terms of the legislation, make those appointments without interference from a political party or political party bosses. So we can either have a capable state or we can have cadre deployment, but we cannot have both, if I can summarize our position on that. And then just briefly for the another minute or two that I have left, I think in looking towards solutions on this, this is not something in my view that we can leave to the discretion of individual political parties. I don't think it's something that will be solved if we say to politicians, please all agree to stop cadre deployment. We are going to need legal reforms if we want to tackle this. And I also want to make the point, it's not only an ANC bashing exercise when we talk about cadre deployment, it is something that could very well extend and outlive ANC dominance as we go into this era of more fractured politics and coalitions. And we've already seen one prominent example in the Western Cape, where a small political party very publicly in the media said that one of their conditions for going into a coalition is to appoint the municipal manager. I submit that that's even more extraordinary than the cadre deployment practices that we have unfortunately become used to. So what we need is for...
Sorry, your time is done.
Is it done?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Leah.
Okay,
Thank you.
if I can just say one more sentence, it's really about legal reforms. We need to change the legal framework and not leave it up to discretion. Thank you.
We will come back to that point. Thank you very much. Spot on in terms of time also. And then we go to Honorable Kanya. Maybe if you wish, you can just switch on your camera.
Yes, switched on. Is it switched on now?
Camera is on, Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
it's now. It's on. Thank you. Thank you. We can see you.
Good morning, Rolf, and good morning to my colleagues. And well, the position of the EFF in terms of addressing the destructive deployment practices in local government is one embedded in building state capacity, which will lead to the abolishment of tenders, which is embedded in our 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars, pillar number 3. And secondly, it is embedded on pillar number 4, free quality education, healthcare, housing and sanitation, and on the code of conduct for public representatives. Because we must appreciate, Rolf, that most of us, we can speak from a position of privilege, and most of us can speak from a position of deprivation by the apartheid system and eventually the post-1994 government, and if you like, the free education movement that happened in university, which advocated for free quality education. But we need an inspired and skilled and well-compensated public service in the municipalities, because some of the things that we have seen in the portfolio committee leaves a lot to be desired, really. You find a mayor in the Northwest, somewhere in a local municipality, who can't even articulate a legislation, who can't even provide proper decision-making. Thus, the EFF proposes that for a successful and sustainable economic development growth, South Africa requires a concerted focus on attainment of skills, education and expertise in various fields. And it further goes and says that all these that are deployed by the organization must seek to improve their level of knowledge, skills and expertise, and must do so by furthering their studies in various colleges, including through distant education and learning. This is done so by an internal monitoring of the organization, whether these are done, and consequences must be implemented where Kanyaceza is not enrolled in a particular institution to self-develop and to understand and to deliver service properly, to have the capacity to deliver service properly. And so embedded at the center of all this, Rolf, is the fact that the environment of the tenders is not a conducive environment to resolve the ethical leadership, because that system is corruptible, and that system inflates prices through the inflation of prices. So you do not have a system like that will actually produce your ethical leadership. You do not have a system like that will actually bring about honest leadership and capable leadership to improve the level of delivery of services to the end users who are actually in need of proper service delivery, the water and sanitation that is needed. So we need to rid ourselves and build internal capacity of the state, so that the state does not outsource all the things. We're not proposing for an overall internal state capacity. We will outsource some of the things, but basic services that are needed by the people must be insourced, including making sure that you have a system where your experienced engineers and your engineers and your artisans are inculcated into the municipality to actually give experience to those that are come. So it's very, very important that we get rid of the patronage that is embedded in the tender system, and we get rid of the patronage itself, because it is dangerous. Political machines that are within the ruling party, political to direct favorable regulatory decisions, contracts, and other benefits to companies owned by themselves and their personal and political connections. That is the danger.
Thank you.
Is the thing that
Thank
is.
you,
That
Kanya.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you that we could keep to the time restrictions so that we have a few minutes to interact with each other. And I would like to put to all three of you one or two questions. The first one would be, in my mind, would it be possible, given the current and new situation after the recent local elections, do you think there's a possibility that we can see more common ground between political parties in addressing the subject of deployment and the negative consequences flowing from that? The second is, do you think there's a need? I think Leon indicated in that direction. Do you think there's a need to further legislation as far as this subject is concerned? And maybe the third one is this problem of the tender system, Kanya, that you referred to. I think we have to look into that, because it's something that, like, it's coming from the outside, but it has a negative impact in the way in which local authorities operate. So maybe if we can have an interaction between the three of you on those 3 points. Who would like to start?
Let me start. Let me start, if my colleagues agree to that.
Yeah, we agree.
I know you are very generous. Yeah, no, that's fine, Deputy Speaker. I think that the common ground will be embedded in the Municipal Systems Act, Rolf, and fellow colleagues. We are, as in the amendment bill, the System Act, the Systems Amendment Bill. I think it's clause 10, Rolf, where we are proposing the professionalization of the municipalities. That first and foremost, the political, the deployments, or rather the people that are in the administration and the senior managers within the municipal space must then have requisite skills and found in political positions. That's what we are proposing, so that you do not have external. Because, Rolf, if you go to the matrix of the as things stand, 64 of COCTA, 64 municipalities, which is 24.9, are considered to be high risk and dysfunctional, while 111 municipalities are considered medium risk. Now, the indicators, including their situation, the state of governance, their financial management, and level of service delivery. Politically, there is infighting in council, there is intra-political divisions in council, there's divisions in caucus, there's external political interference, there's persistent and frequent Section 139, particularly and especially on the dissolution, which is Section 139(1)(c) of the Constitution, Ruth and fellow colleagues. And that is perpetual. And it does not bring about the desired results, the intended results. And in its nature, Rolf, that particular intervention is reactive. So we have to put about in the legislation preventive measures to detect, not only to detect, but to then preempt corruption within those municipalities, so that we realize the intended purpose of improving local government.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanya. Let's go to the other two colleagues as well. If there's time, I will come back to you afterwards. Who would like to go next?
Rolf, you put me in a very uncomfortable position of speaking before the deputy speaker, so he must definitely go next.
It's okay, I'll speak last. It's okay.
Yeah. Let him have the last word. Okay, Leon.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, on those three specific questions, I think there is potential for this multi-party governments to potentially realize that it is in the interest of all coalition partners or everyone involved in such a government that there is a merit-based appointment system in place in a given municipality. If no one has complete control or absolute power in that municipality, theoretically that could lead to such a situation. But I think there's also a danger that where municipalities are beholden often to very small parties, that the need to actually keep those parties on board can lead to concessions being made. And then you have situations like the one where I pointed out, where a small party actually demands the power to appoint the municipal manager. So I think it can swing in both ways. You may have positive examples, but I think you'll also end up having negative ones. And that takes me to the question of legislation again. I think Kanya was pointing out some of these recent amendments, which are good amendments that made it illegal for political office holders to be appointed as municipal officials. And I think that we must recognize that there's progress there. It's certainly not enough, but that is something positive. I think what's needed at the national and provincial level, first of all, if I can just say something about that, that we really have not used the Public Service Commission, a Chapter 10 institution in our Constitution, nearly enough to help us with this matter. And I think it's time to really look at giving far more powers, making the Public Service Commission also more independent, so that we actually give an external independent body more say in this matter. And to this extent, I've tabled the Public Administration General Amendment Bill, which does some of that. I'm not saying it's the end of the road, but I think it can start a discussion for us in Parliament on this matter. And then finally, on the issue of tenders, again, the question for me is, who's managing these supply chain processes? Who's making decisions about what is outsourced, insourced, and about contracts? And that takes me back to this question about who are appointed, who are the people appointed to these positions. We fundamentally have to deal with the appointment and recruitment process, and must keep in mind, in a country with such massive youth unemployment, the number of skilled graduates who are unemployed, as an example, are people who are locked out by catered employment. We can desperately use those skills in local government.
Thank you very much. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think there ought to be enough space for us to agree on in dealing with some of the things. Because of my history in local government, some of the legal reforms that have been referred to, I signed off. Some of the amendments, including the regulatory requirements that Section 57, including municipal managers, have to have certain competencies. That even if you are a professional, if you have not developed specific competencies that are relevant to local government, it should not be done so. So abuse of deployment, or what is called destructive deployment, is what is wrong. The law itself, as we were advised by those who came before us, is intended to change behavior. But its existence, if this wrong behavior continues in spite of the presence of the legislation, what does it mean? So where else should we look at to change the system? I think Leon divides the selection of candidate and that process from the deployment of people into professional positions. I want to suggest that we shouldn't divide them. They are a continuum. They are a continuous process. If I, as a candidate, came in and was endorsed relatively because people trusted me, that I haven't up to that stage shown any wrongdoing practices, that I'm likely also to act similarly when I interact with others who should be professionals, that I would like to see that they themselves are professional. If we do not see the connection between the two, then we are making a mistake. I also want to suggest that yes, I want to use the language also used by Kanya at the beginning about the environment. We must not underestimate the corrupting influence of the environment. I want to suggest the socioeconomic system that encourages, in fact, glorifies ostentation and greed as an acceptable thing is what is wrong also. And that's where the roots of attempting to get things that do not belong to me or should not be with me because I did not earn them. So, and this one, the ANC has done analysis on, predicted its consequences, and the initiatives that are underway now internally to reverse the impact of that comes from there, from the recognition that the corrupt also comes from the private sector, just as often some of them come from inside the public sector. And so we must deal with problems at different levels of systems. We must not only assume that it comes from the deployment. Some of the people were professional. They were very, they had deep expertise, but they were corrupted, okay? Or they were blackmailed and they were undermined.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go to general questions. And I think Fatima has captured some of the questions that might be very important and relevant for this discussion. Fatima, can I throw it back to you?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to our panelists this morning. There's been a lot of interest from our attendees this morning. Firstly, thanking you as political parties for coming onto the platform and being able to talk about this very important and topical issue, but also asking some questions posed to you. So perhaps, Mr. Mayor, I'll start. There was a question. There's also a comment that's been made to our panelists, thanking our panelists for offering the solutions as part of the opening addresses, for pointing out the party positions, but also an appeal to our panelists as custodians of their party processes to please move beyond stating it, but to put it into action or to put it into practice. There was a question from Graham to Honorable Tonoli. Honorable Tonoli, when you started in your opening address, you made a comment about an undertaking to fight corruption. The question to you is, what would be your understanding of undertaking to fight? Is that a legal requirement within the party, or is it a legal requirement within the country? Perhaps there's a question to you about what does that actually mean? What does undertaking to fight mean? There's a curiosity around that.
Okay. Oh, okay. No. What it means
let's
that
keep it,
if you...
Let's keep it to 2 minutes, the answers. Let's keep the answers to 2 minutes, please.
Yes. The pledge, the undertaking, as I said also in that you're joining the organization without a desire to amass money, or you won't do anything to put the organization into disrepute. If you are fraudulent, if you steal money, and if you do patronage, you are putting the organization into disrepute. You are making it unpopular to the people who send us in there without that. So when we ask people to do that, it's so that there is a basis for us additionally to say to them, look at what you have done. You have violated your own pledge that you undertook. But secondly, also, it is illegal to be fraudulent, to be corrupt. So the law must take its course and act against you. And this is why we have decided that such people as charged with those kind of things must step aside. In fact, better if they resign completely. So that's what I understand by undertaking. It's a practical thing. that strengthen what already exists, but add to our, hopefully, speed with which we can act against them. Because usually that's the problem, that these things are spotted, but we are often guilty of not swiftly moving in to implement decisions that already exist. So for me, that would be the biggest instrument in our hands, both from a legal point of view and from an internal disciplinary foundation.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. There's a question, Mr. Mayor, that the panel, that the attendees are asking. Are the parties open to lifestyle audits pre their assumption of office, and again at the beginning of each financial year of municipalities? And in particular, the question is also being posed to the parties that now find themselves in the position of being in control or ruling municipalities. So perhaps that's the question that the panelists can engage on.
If I can give you each 5 minutes, 1 minute on that.
My answer is yes, absolutely. I think it's appropriate, so that we do not find people extremely ostentatious, freshly into council with sources of money that we do not know. Even before they go into that, it's important that we must be satisfied that what they have is theirs legitimately. It's not as a result of use of proceeds of criminal conduct.
Leon?
Sure, yeah, the answer is also yes. The Western Cape government, after the 2019 election, within a period of 9 months, did carry out lifestyle audits on the cabinet. And I know that the new mayor of Cape Town, Jordan Hill Lewis, has also announced lifestyle audits for his mayoral committee. So it is something that we've done, that we are doing more. And I think it's something that can and should be rolled out really across the board. But it is one intervention. And I think, once again, we shouldn't lose sight of the systemic problems within which lifestyle audits also operate. And we have to look at that picture more broadly. It's not a silver bullet, but it's an important part of the solution.
Thank you. Kanya?
Thanks, Rolf. Again, the answer is yes from me, because we believe that there should be a lifestyle audit for councillors and members of parliament. We've just done one now for public and confidential for the financial year under review. And we think that we should have a lifestyle audit, because you will find councillors that are in the municipality against our councillors. When you measure them, they are extremely rich, if not wealthy, and you do not know where they find. And there are allegations that at some point other councillors collude with tourists in some municipalities, local municipalities, Nemakazeni, and they get the monies from the 10% of I don't know what 10% is there for in your coal mines there. I don't know what for, and through those forums that they have there, and community forums, and they amass wealth out of that, and they get super wealthy, and our councillors will ask, oh, these councillors, we are working with them, we're doing the same thing, if not more, but they hardly speak in the council. They just come there to rub a stamp, and they get rich. Where do they get this money? So I think that there should be a lifestyle audit. The Auditor General, the Chapter 9 institution, must come to play and use his powers to actually hold councillors and executive to account. And I wanted to speak to the issue of joining an organization with.
Sorry, can you?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Fatima, you have more questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. There is a concern that's being raised by a number of our attendees around the educational qualifications of councillors, and that, especially seen during the elections, that parties continue to promote elections of councillors who don't have the necessary educational background, and that this then causes an impact on governance within the municipalities. I think partly it has been addressed, Mr. Mayor, but again, just the question is coming up about the position of the various political parties on this particular matter. Perhaps if there's anything.
Can we start with you, Kanya? You mentioned the question of skills right at the start. 1 minute, please.
Yes, please. 1 minute. No individual councillors are elected through an internal process of the organization, but there is a code of conduct, and then there is a declaration that you sign that you will be doing. But it's not a matter of that. It's a matter of do you then, as an organization, have systems in place to ensure that those people are acquiring necessary skills to get to understand, to acquire knowledge about the departments and the portfolio committees and the community they serve? Are you able to say that those people have acquired knowledge as a political party? And I think that if we can do that, we can start doing that, then we can get value for public representatives in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon.
Thank you. Yes. So, I mean, obviously, education and skills and competence are important metrics that the DA uses to select candidates. But I do want to just go back to what I said at the beginning about this distinction between the electoral system and democracy and the public administration or the civil service. So we do not have a qualified franchise in South Africa. We are a democracy where any South African citizen should be allowed and able to stand as a candidate wherever they want to. But what really is the crux of the matter is in the civil service, in the municipal administration or in the provincial or national administration, the officials appointed there, they are the ones where we have to impose strict criteria in terms of education, skills, and competence. Because the elected politician is the policy maker. They are the person elected by the community to say, this is the direction in which we want to go. And we cannot qualify that franchise. What we must then say is the people who implement that policy direction, the officials in that government, that is where qualification, skills, and competence is critical. And that is unfortunately where cadre deployment has prevented people with those skills and qualifications from being appointed in those positions.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker, on the subject, 1 minute.
Yeah. There's no question that the people who go into council to become public representatives, and this is why they are called public representatives, must firstly have the confidence of the people in whose neighborhoods they come from and their service, and they are trusted to do a good job. Some of them may not have qualifications necessarily. The point that there's no question about the jobs, administrative functions must be done by qualified people. There's no question. And they don't, and there's no magic one that says if you are ANC, or let me say if you are DA, because the DA has chucked out very professional people who happen to be DA because they were ideologically different from them and they were not comfortable with having them serve in very senior positions. Those people were let go under any different circumstances. Elected people, but especially the officials. My focus is on the officials. In other words, the top leadership of the council must have some basis of education to be able to handle the complex matters in local government and so on, but also where this support must be available, emanating best. So I agree generally with we need education. The induction processes ahead, and subsequently inside the state machinery as a whole, the induction programs that must be followed and be evaluated constantly to ensure they're up to date, today that they are using appropriate technologies, so that when the people end their term of office, they have qualified in very significant programs and educationally as well. They are better than when they entered.
Thank you. I think we're coming to the end of our session, Fatima. Let me use 30 seconds just to reflect on an observation I recently made with regard to training in municipalities. In the Waterberg district, there was a training session held over 4 modules in which inter alia the municipal manager participated. And I noted that he is in this audience this morning. Maybe offline he can share later on with LGELI what he detected from that training session. It was a training session consisting of 4 modules over a period of a number of months, in which municipal officials from all the municipalities in the district participated together with business and together with civil society. And my observation was it brought along a lot of commonalities, but also the opportunity for upscaling skills in the district development municipality of the Waterberg. So maybe later on, Precious Stone, who is the municipal manager, can share that with us offline. But thank you very much. I think we come to the end of our panel. Deputy Speaker, Leon and Kanya, thank you very much for your participation. I think it was a lively but very constructive discussion. I appreciate it. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to our panelists. There was lots of interest as well in the chat and the Q&A function. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to get to all of the questions, but we certainly are taking those into account and will share it further into our processes. We'd like to encourage you to please keep them coming because they're really important to our session today. I'd now like to call on Mr. Sigaba, the Acting Deputy Director General, Institutional Development at the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. And Mr. Sigaba is going to share with us the government's regulatory response to the challenges surrounding destructive deployment practices. Just by way of background, Mr. Sigaba is also an ex officio member of the Local Government Advisory Council, as Mr. Mayor was. Mr. Sigaba, good morning and welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Fatima, and also thank you for the invitation. Good morning, and let me greet the leadership of the Institute, our honorable members of Parliament, I think our councillors, colleagues from the local government fraternity, and our guests. Thanks for the opportunity. It's always difficult to talk after, you know, the parliamentarians have taken the stage, but I will try my best. I will just look at also at the cadre deployment as a policy, maybe just to instigate some questions or an understanding. But without wasting time, this is the sort of outline of my presentation, but I won't be detailed in terms of the transformation agenda. I will move more talking to the problem statement and look at the legislation. But if we look at cadre development, maybe as just as a definition, we see it as the appointment of a government's governing party of a loyalist to an institution as a means of enhancing public reporting lines and ensuring that the institution stays true to the mandate of the party as elected by voters. If you put it in simple terms, cadre deployment refers to a process through which political parties in a democracy give effect to their policies and objectives by preferring functionaries who subscribes to the same values. In the South African context, there's been a tendency of associating this practice with only the ruling party. But from our own experience as in local government, all political parties follow this practice where they govern. It would be disingenuous for any political party to fill state entities and government with people who will not deliver on its program and mandate as given by the electorate. So in the South African political discourse, there's been a tendency to characterize cadre deployment as an opposite of meritocracy. And I think some of the questions that have been posed here sometimes also are sort of reflecting on this. Is this policy on its own problematic of cadre deployment? I don't think so. But is there space for improvement in how it gets to be implemented? Absolutely. And I think even the MPs, they reflected that maybe we need to regulate this sector. But in the 22, if I look at the problem statement now, in the 26 years of democratic public service, there's not been any decisive intervention in the professionalization of the public service. There's been just a greater fixation on compliance whilst neglecting to determine how compliance impacts on matters of professionalization and performance. But in the current sixth administration, there's a recognition for a call to strategic and decisive intervention to professionalize the public service by setting the bar higher than that of achieving clean audit outcomes. If we look at the lack of professionalism and the way it has detrimental consequences, and it manifests itself, for example, in nepotism in the absence of formal and relevant qualifications, political interference, rivalries, we're referring to factions in some cases here, lack of accountability, low staff morale, and serious growing corruption. We have seen the escalating in the audit outcomes, the escalating unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless expenditure, and the service delivery process that have been characterized by violence, fatalities, and damage to infrastructure. Many skills can be developed on the job, but staff sometimes are often promoted too rapidly before acquiring the experience needed for senior posts. This is in part a reflection of the skills shortage in broader society, but specific intervention within the public service can help ameliorate this. Services cannot be delivered without people and with the necessary skills and knowledge. Whether they are nurses or doctors or engineers or planners,
Mr. Sigaba, you went off onto mute, sir. Trevor?
When is that? Just now?
You're back on now, Mr. Sigaba. It was just a couple of seconds, sir.
Now, if we look now at some of the contributing factors to this sort of deployment that has not actually been fulfilling the purpose, you will see that there was an absence of prescribed minimum skills and qualifications and expertise, particularly around municipal managers and Section 56 managers. Those are the managers that report to the municipal manager. There's also been a lack of uniform norms and standards. Opponents were not using the competency criteria, and the appointment procedures were not there. I think our MP, Lichisa Tsinoli, did refer to these competencies. We had also these disparate human resource practices from municipalities, which actually made, in some cases, for people not being able to move from one municipality to another. And then there was also the lack of institutional capacity and individual capacity. We're referring here to poor leadership and lack of professional and technical skills. There was also local government not being seen as a career of choice, but just nepotism. And the lack of technical career paths. I think we've seen the fact that most of our infrastructure is not being maintained because of these challenges. The short-term approach to local government capacity building initiatives. If we look at the infrastructure that we have, we find that, for instance, if we are going to put up a water treatment plant, the water treatment plant, for instance, would last for between 20 and 30 years. But our training, you find that it normally train artisans just to do minimal work. We're not training people that are going to be engineers and maintain these wastewater treatment plants. Hence, we see the spillages in our communities. There's also the challenges of inability to conceptualize projects Hence, there's a delay in the implementation. We have seen the under expenditure on our capital projects, ineffective revenue collection strategies. We have seen, these are all attributable to, in some cases, people being placed in positions where they are not actually capable. I'll make the example, for instance, of the expanded public works program. The expanded public works program is a public employment program that actually was sort of a temporal in terms of addressing issues of unemployment and poverty. And people that are employed in this program are employed on a temporal basis based on the project. If, for instance, there's a road project that's going to last for 24 months, then people would be employed as part of labor intensive to be used in this project. But unfortunately, when the contracts end, you find the unions bargaining for these people to be employed permanently in the municipality, and then you have this bloated infrastructure. I see that if I can just go then to some of the legislation, I did refer to the fact that there's a journey that was that is a transformation journey or agenda that has been traversed. And but if you look at the highlighted, there's been some regulations on appointment conditions of employment for municipal managers and managers directly responsible. That was released in 2014. So there's been a sort of an improvement in trying to address this issue of having sort of norms and standards in employing suitable and competent people in the municipal space. We do have a bill that has been introduced now to Parliament to try and address some of the weaknesses in our Local Government Municipal Systems Amendment Act. This bill was with the National Council of Provinces and is with our National Assembly now for finalization, because the intention is that we want to have this bill effective from 1st of April next year. This bill actually provides for the legislation envisaged in Section 195 of the Constitution, looking at the values and principles governing public administration. This bill is central to the realization of the ideals of the National Development Plan. I won't talk in details except the fact that this development plan wants to build a resilient and a capable and a developmental local government. If we look at the object of the bill, for instance, there are new clauses that regulate the appointment of municipal managers and acting municipal managers. The proposed amendment will enable the minister to determine by regulation through guidelines a minimum level of skills, expertise, competencies, and qualification for municipal managers appointed from the date from which section takes effect, which we are planning to have it 1st of April next year. The intention of the proposed amendment is that appointment should be declared null and void if the person appointed as municipal manager or acting municipal manager does not have the prescribed skills, expertise, competencies, and qualification. The other object of the bill is the limitation of political rights will not only apply to municipal managers and managers directly accountable to municipal managers holding office at the time when the Section 56 takes effect. The bill also proposes new clauses providing that a staff member of any municipality who has been dismissed for misconduct may only be re-employed in any particular municipality after the expiry of that prescribed period. I think it's 2 to 3 years. The proposed substitution further provides that a staff member dismissed of financial misconduct, which could be corruption, contemplated in the Local Government Financial Management Act, may not be re-employed for a period of 10 years. This bill also proposes the introduction of a system. I think I'm done.
Yes.
This bill also proposes the introduction of the system whereby municipalities will be required to maintain a record regarding disciplinary proceedings of staff members dismissed for misconduct and forwarded to the MEC for local government, who in turn must forward it to the minister. The last is that the bill proposes to amend the disciplinary code for municipal councillors contained in Schedule 1 to the Systems Act by adding a provision to prevent councillors from voting in favor of resolutions before the council or a committee of the council where such resolutions are in conflict with legislation applicable to local government. Fatima?
Thank you, Mr. Sigaba.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sigaba, thank you very much for that presentation. There's a lot of interest in your slides and in the content that you presented, and we will certainly be sharing your slide deck with the attendees from this morning's session so that they can take these discussions further internally and share with the colleagues within their respective organizations as well. Thank you, Mr. Sigaba, for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Next up, I'd like to call onto screen our facilitator, Ms. Miriam van Donk, and the panelists from the civil society quarters. We, for the discussion this morning on the civil society response to the discussions that we've heard this morning. By way of introduction, Ms. Miriam van Donk is the Deputy Chairperson of the Local Government Advisory Council, as well as the Director of the Isandla Institute and the former Chair of the Good Governance Learning Network. Miriam, good morning to you and your panelists.
Morning, Fatima. Morning, colleagues. And thank you so much for the invitation and to be part of this panel today and this webinar. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce the speakers to you today. The first is Ms. Linda Koegsle-Wellem, who is with Ephesus Core Plan, an NGO based in the Eastern Cape, working extensively on local participatory local democracy, good governance, alternative human settlements developments, and community developments. Welcome, Linda. Secondly, Dr. Shiham Johnston, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Dalla Oma Institute, which is based at the University of the Western Cape. Dr. Johnston has substantial experience in working in both the public sector and local government in particular. So good morning, Shiham. And thirdly, Mr. Karam Singh, who is the head of legal and the incoming executive director at Corruption Watch, I think an organization that needs very little introduction in this forum today. I am unable to see the panelists at the moment. I would like to just have this go fairly conversationally and put a few questions to our panelists and take that conversation forward. And then hopefully we also have some time to pick up on comments and questions from the audience with your guidance, Fatima. But Lindo, just to start off with you, what impact does kind of deployments and particularly improper deployments have on citizens?
Thank you, Miriam, and good morning to everybody on the Zoom call. First and foremost, I think we always look at it on one side that maybe deployment is for unskilled managers, but we have experienced issues with skilled and unskilled deployment, making it inappropriate. But it elevates corruption within local governance. That's the first thing. And then services don't get to the people. And then there's obviously a lack of transparency when you are wanting to make follow-up on the services that are meant to be for communities. Here in East London, I mean, we have the Duncan Village Redevelopment Initiative. It was a 2007 initiative, but nothing significant had been done for all this time. And that was because of unskilled personnel that was managing that program within Duncan Village. It's only now through the COVID that significant work has been done in Duncan Village, where people were moved to the temporary housing because of the density of the space. And because of the lack of the manager's skills, it could not be done where zones are sectioned off and people are moved to other areas within or outside the East London as the city. And then here in Amatole, I mean, we have a great water crisis. And there you have a municipal manager that has the skills. I mean, but you are finding that communities in Qentani, which is in Muma municipality, are suing and are going against the municipality in court because of services that don't get to them. Fortunately, the community won that case. However, that was purely based on their constitutional right and the fact that it's a human right to have water and sanitation. But there are the Amatole as a district has so many managers that are in East London, with a huge salary bill, and you get to Mbashe, Muma, there aren't enough people for the maintenance of boreholes where people get access to the water. So there, in that space where salaries are ballooned, and it's almost 80% of the municipal budget only going to salaries, and there's no maintenance of the infrastructure that is there. So there you would think, why would a municipal manager who had a turnaround strategy in 2017 already allow it to go in a downward spiral if they were appropriately appointed? You would find that in spaces where people are put in as managers in districts or municipalities, coming from failing or ailing municipalities. And so even though they may have the correct qualifications and they've been in the system for many years, the patronage and who they are loyal to, that comes out in terms of the ethics that they then bring forth when they do their work. And also, I mean, there's a lack when you appoint with deployment, there's a lack of loyalty to the locality as well. You'll find that, okay, I'll only be here for 5 years, let me squander as much as I can and move on to the next city, the next town. And so there's a lack of vision in terms of, here people are always talking about there's a drought in the Eastern Cape. We have known for many years about global warming, but there's been no vision to put forward plans, because the issue is to get and acquire as much resources for personal gain rather than for communities themselves. So it's a bit of a dichotomy. There are skilled and there are the unskilled deployments, and we are finding ourselves in that murky or gray waters.
Thank you, Linda. So thank you also for picking up on some of the things that have come through in the earlier conversation. For one, deployment isn't only limited to those who don't have the appropriate skills, and corruption isn't necessarily limited to those who are unskilled or inappropriately skilled either. And nor is deployment the only issue that is plaguing kind of municipal functioning and service delivery. Shiham, just to turn to you, how does, if we just focus in on improper deployment, how is it affecting municipalities as institutions, but more particularly local government as an institution overall?
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you for the question. I'm very excited to share my the insights that I have on the topic and the effects that it has on local government. First of all, as an institution, local government needs to meet the constitutional standard of Section 152, which is to be developmental. And so, for example, they have to have sustainable services, they have to provide democratic governance, have the participation of the community in all matters and affairs of the local government, and they have to promote a safe environment. And the crux of the matter is that they are bound in terms of the in performing their services by respecting the values and principles of Section 195 of the Constitution, which calls for a high degree of ethics and for them to be developmental. Now, what is happening in practice is that there's a contestation. In practice, you see that because of cadre deployment, there is a breakdown in basic service delivery and a frustration from civil society. And the civic barometer, protest barometer, for example, as far back as 2018 that the Undermined Institute carried out, already has shown that protests are becoming more violent, and civil society more often are turning to the courts as a remedy with regards to the breakdown in service delivery. So I want to highlight 3 cases that demonstrates that civil society is going to the courts to remedy the situation. And it's, for instance, it's the Makana case, in that case, where the unemployed people's movement, supported by the Rhodes University, went to court and asked for the court to demand that the provincial government dissolve the municipal council. And then there's also the issue, for instance, of Lekwa municipality. Unfortunately, the judgment is not reported, the judgment is not reportable, so I can only go on the order of the court. But in that case, Astral Operations Limited asked the court to compel the national government to intervene because of breakdowns in services. And I mean, this is quite unprecedented. And why this is important is because Astral Operations Limited is the main employer in that municipality. So what this is saying to you, that a local government that must be developmental is now restricting the development of the municipality. And then the last case I want to mention is this is tongue twister. It's a Getlagin Rivier case that concerned, which is, I mean, one of the first of its cases where the court initially allowed the concerned residents association to take over and control a municipal asset, the water purification works, which was then overturned. But the crux of the matter is that you're having now residents taking over functions that are supposed to be carried out by municipalities. And then the question that we then have to ask ourselves, Miriam, linking back to what was said by the politicians and also what was presented by Cooperative, do we need more law reform? You know, Jaap Visser speaks about, the director of the Dalamar speaks about the weaponization of laws for nefarious reasons. So, for example, the presenter from Cooperative spoke about how the professionalization has led to more compliance driven than rather actual professionalization. And for example, there are studies and trends that have been shown that it's used where you have competent personnel, but because of political reasons, they are then whipped with the weaponization of the compliance laws and saying, well, you don't match up. Unfortunately, you cannot be afforded the position. But the other issue I also want to mention, Miriam, is that what we also need to look at is, and this was mentioned in the previous discussion also, is the lack of and the weak oversight from provincial government. And this is a key issue because Section 1 of the Constitution actually mandates the national government and the provincial government to offer local government support, and they're supposed to monitor and have oversight in terms of the appointments. So the question then becomes, what are the role of provincial governments in also playing an oversight role to prevent cadre deployment? And I see you wanting to indicate my time. Oh, I missed what I want to say.
I'll hope to come back to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Shihab. I hope to come back to you, but I do want to give Karam an opportunity as well to just weigh in on this conversation. And you opened the door very nicely for that, because Karam, I was going to ask you, you've heard this morning from the political parties, what are some of the measures within that political sphere? We've also heard something about what's happening in the legislative sphere, what's been happening over the years and what's in front of Parliament at the moment in terms of legislative changes to address these issues. In your view, are those actions, are those initiatives sufficient? And if not, what else do you think is required?
Thank you. Thanks, Miriam. And I do have one eye on the clock, and I don't want to cover any ground that the others have said, but I think it really remains to be seen. One was kind of taken by the slides from our colleague from COGTA to see the different reforms that have been put in place and proposed at different stages in the process, but yet we still see these sort of fundamental challenges. So from Corruption Watch's standpoint, we've received over 5,000 complaints of corruption in local government since 2012. And 1/3 of those complaints relate to the Office of the Municipal Manager. The AGSA in the 2019-2020 report spoke about 26 billion Rand in irregular expenditure. So, that we clearly are sitting with a significant corruption challenge. And I think, we need to take a kind of a step back and think about the different corruption vulnerabilities that are in place at different stages in the process. So if you think about kind of the life cycle of trying to put an anti-corruption kind of framework in place, you think about the different stages. We talk about preventative measures. We talk about detection measures. We talk about then the institution of independent investigations and then consequence management. At each of those stages in the process, we have fundamental vulnerabilities and shortfalls. So if we go back to Dr. Johnston's point around oversight, we have a major challenge around oversight, not just with the provincial departments, also with the national department, also with the establishment of functional municipal public account committees, and then the actual role that citizens and communities should be playing in terms of exercising active citizens approach to oversight and monitoring. The system as it's currently set up just doesn't accommodate that. So, some of that can be addressed by law reform, but as we know, often, the challenge is not really about having the legal structures in place. It's around how those are implemented and enforced. So, taking a bit of a step back, the principles that we would always look at from Corruption Watch's standpoint in evaluating these questions are, issues around good governance, issues around oversight, issues around accountability, and issues around availability of information and transparency. So one of the big reforms that we would push for is a much more transparent process, particularly around procurement and around how public spending operates and the availability of information publicly, preferably on a digital platform that people can scrutinize, and then greater transparency around the appointment process so that process can then be monitored and that there can be interventions at different stages where we see irregular appointments taking place. And then, interlinked to that is the role of public participation. The public can only meaningfully participate in a context where they have access to good information. And you're only going to have access to good information if you have a transparent system in place, which is facilitated by ICT, and where there are different user groups that are capacitated to actually fulfill that oversight and functioning role. So, let me leave those initial comments there.
Thank you, Karam. I think you're starting to lead us also to kind of the next question, which we unfortunately don't have that much time for. We won't be able to kind of resolve all the issues here, but I'd like each of you to just briefly comment, quite practically. What do you think the role of civil society organizations and local communities and local citizens is to address this issue? So to take use of that space that you were talking about, Karam, that should be enabled through systems interventions, but also what else is needed, partly to make sure that those many legislative interventions or regulatory interventions that have been promoted are adhered to, that what political parties have told us this morning will be implemented and will become a reality. So I'd like to just give all of you a quick moment to just in about 2 to 3 minutes talk quite practically. What do you think can be done and should be done? And Lindo, again, we'll just take it in turn. So let's start with you.
Thank you, Miriam, again. And I'd like to say some of my notes Karam has already covered. But yes, a more transparent process of deployment. As civil society, be involved in committees where deployment will be happening. Assess who's coming in, from where do they come from, what was the institution that they left, and how did they leave it before they come into where we are. That I think civil society has the capacity to do in terms of doing background projects that they can then disseminate to citizens. I think that is our primary focus, and is that acquiring knowledge and getting access to knowledge, access to information within the municipalities, and then taking that in and saying to the groups and communities we work in, this is the status quo and this is what is currently happening. Definitely audit in terms of the appointees or the candidates that are to be deployed, because there again you get a lot of 10% here of whatever contracts that the municipality is putting out, and they go into specific individuals, and also opening up the funding structure of political parties, because we find that in smaller municipalities you will have your Guptas of the space that are getting the contracts from these small municipalities, maybe siphoning it off to the branches within their localities. So at a larger scale, opening up and being transparent about the funding mechanisms of political parties, and give more oversight powers to the MPECs. Currently, they will do an evaluation or based on the Auditor General's report, but throughout the year, things are happening. Projects are being run. Infrastructure money is being spent. That grant, it's one of the grants that most of the corruption is done. Looking at those projects, I mean, here in the Eastern Cape in the last couple of months, we've had a spate of sports fields that have been overpriced, and it's in some instances not being useful for what they were intended. So the MPEGs are meant to be monitoring those processes. I, for one, called one of the municipalities, Sakisizwe, where one of the sports field was overpriced. The MPEG manager said that, no, we cannot do anything about it. We need to get a mandate from council. So that there happens within their space, and they aren't able to monitor those processes until the very end. That whole notion of information to the public, did that community have the information before the project started? Could they monitor that process before the whole and before the project was going on? So those are the things that as civil society we can advocate for more of, because personally and as an organization, we don't feel that we have exhausted the current infrastructure within our governing systems to say that we need to move on to the next. People are not doing enough to say that we have tried and tested as citizens of this particular area and of this city or district. We have tried and done A, B, C, and D. And I just received on the chat that we should, as organizations, also partner up with each other. Ephesus does not have lawyers within. However, we've met cases where we have gotten to a point where we are saying, Ish, right now, if we had lawyers within the ranks of Ephesus, we would push this forward. But there are partners within civil society that can carry the burden with us. And that's how we can practically move with things. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Shiham, your view on what civil society and communities and citizens can do? You're still muted, Shiham.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Linda Kule. You really helped me because you said much of the ideas that I had in my mind. What I would like to add, though, is that we need to remember as civil society and as the community that within the local government sphere, the speaker needs to has an oversight role over the executive. So that is an important avenue to hold the executive of the community accountable. And then, as I mentioned earlier about the 3 cases, what those cases depicted, that is when citizens are active, when they say, like you said, Linda Kule, that they partner with lawyers, and they start having a paper trail with all their interactions with the municipality, and then submitting that to the provincial government, for example, investigations into maladministration or corruption. That is the one, that's the other option they have. But then also they can resort to the court. And in Echelaghen River case, the court actually imprisoned the municipal, said that if the municipal manager does not fix the wastewater problem within 90 days, then he imprisoned the municipal manager and made it on suspension. So there was even criminal sanction that could have occurred in that instance. So the bottom line is what Karim said earlier, that there needs to be active citizenship. And then from there needs to be a will from the civil society and other people and other organizations to partner and to educate the community around their rights. What are the constitutional standards? Because that will guide us as to what framework we need to work within. And then lastly, I also want to add that in terms of the parliamentary processes that are happening, it's very critical in terms of the deployment issue that the systems amendment bill is actually now thinking of putting a complete ban on municipal officials holding political offices. So, I mean, that will really be a huge factor that will aid in this regard. I think that's fine. That's all for me now, Mariam. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiham. Karam, the final comment to you. Anything you'd like to add to what your colleagues have mentioned already?
Well, my colleagues have said so much, Chair, but briefly, I was encouraged by what the political parties said about social audits. I think lifestyle audits. I think we must legislate lifestyle audits. I think at the end of the process where there are disciplinaries that take place, we must have much stronger debarment mechanisms to make sure that we close off that possibility of corrupt officials moving from one municipality to the other. But broadly on the role of civil society, and this is really broad strokes, public education and training, public education in terms of creating that notion of active citizenry, and then training of officials, empowering of MPACs. I think that's critical. I mentioned social audits, assisting communities with the conducting of social audits. I think that's a really important methodology that can act as a kind of a monitoring and oversight mechanism. As Siam has spoken about, provision of different types of legal support. So again, the empowering of community advice offices, particularly around these issues around good governance and transparency. I think the work that the Ethics Institute's doing in terms of research, Corruption Watch has also done some research. I think these are critical interventions, pushing for independent investigations, analyzing trends, broadly pushing for advocacy reforms around both structured and principled notions of accountability, good governance, enhanced oversight, transparency, and ethical conduct. I think this is how civil society can intervene and add value. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. I know we kind of just about scratching the surface, getting comfortable with each other and wanting to talk a lot more. Fatima, I don't know if there's any comments or questions you want to pick up from the chat. I know we're also running out of time.
Yes, but perhaps just to say huge appreciation for the panel and for the discussion today, resonating really well with what people are feeling, especially from the accountability elements and some of the practical advice that's been given. But perhaps one question that I want to pull out is, Shyam and Karim, there's a question, lots of agreement around the points that you're making, but there are problems, the speaker notes, around the lack of proper oversight and consequence management in both local and provincial government. And how do you propose that these be addressed? And I'm bringing this up because it was also brought up in the political party slot, but we never really got to it because of time. So a little bit about the consequence management and how do you address that to bring about a positive change at local government level? Just some thoughts there, perhaps, Mariam.
Thank you, Fatima. And unfortunately, Karam and Shiham, really short and focused. So Karam, why don't you start first, and then Shiham, you can come in after.
I'll just make one very brief comment, which is the phenomenon that we've had for going back many years around legitimate independent investigations taking place that aren't politicized, that don't fall between national and provincial. So, we often see that investigations do happen. We see that the SIU gets a proclamation to come into a municipality. They do a thorough investigation, their findings and recommendations, and then they aren't actioned. And that's a weakness in the SIU model, but it's also a weakness broadly in our approach to anti-corruption, whereby we don't have a dedicated agency that can sort of drive a consequence management from the inception of an investigation to the end. So there are these handoffs that happen in the process, hands off to the police, hands off to the NPA and others. So I don't know how practical this is as a recommendation, but we need to have some type of mechanism in place whereby legitimate independent investigations can take place, but then those findings and recommendations are actioned, that they don't just gather dust on a shelf as a report or become a kind of political football that nobody actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karam. Shiham, anything to add? And please unmute yourself.
Sorry. So there are just two distinctions for me. The one is, are we looking at lack of consequence management for individual conduct? That's the one. And then the second issue, are we looking at lack of consequence management for the institution itself? When we're dealing with the individual, the crux of the matter is, if the provincial government is not taking the oversight steps that they have to do, then that matter can be escalated, and it will then need to be resolved within intergovernmental relations with regards to then escalating the matter to national government. Alternatively, there can also be, for example, if there is an irregular appointment of a municipal manager, the person, aggrieved party, could then go straight to the court and challenge that appointment, for example, in a court of law. But then, if we're dealing with the lack of consequence for an institution of local government, then there would be the intervention mechanism in the constitution that then can be accessed, because there are two tools that can be used. The one is the investigation in terms of Section 106 of the Municipal Systems Act, where there's an investigation, and the other one is the Section 139 of the Constitution, where there is intervention into municipality that fails to deliver certain executive obligations, or where there is a financial crisis within the municipality. So let me stop there because it does become very technical. Yeah, but those are the type of tools that can be used for consequence management.
Thank you, Shiham. Fatima, are we wrapping up?
Yes, unfortunately, we are running short of time, but perhaps just Linda, I mean, huge appreciation for speaking the truth, kind of voicing the concerns that resonate really well with people. Just, a sense that true accountability for citizens, true ability for citizens to hold local government to account would be the ability to recall or remove councillors who are found to be wanting. Just Linda, quickly, I know legalities aside, just your thoughts on that.
Well, it's quite a process, and it's one of the mechanisms that need to be looked at in terms of how do we assist communities to be part of a municipality. We're always saying this is the definition of what a municipality is. There's the citizen, the communities, the administration, and the council. However, we are not doing very much to strengthen the communities in terms of the powers that they have within a municipality. You write a letter to the speaker, it takes forever to turn around and come back with an answer to you as a concerned citizen. It has to go to the MEC, and during that time, things are going on as if there has not been a complaint that has been set against this particular councillor. And so if we can find mechanisms of making that an easier process for communities, I think we might win the battle, but it's still that getting information first and moving towards the correct processes, and seeing what is the conclusion to your actions. But Currently, most conclusions are your violent protests, and as civil society, then we need to assist and shift how people protest without information at times, but have information and address things according to how the infrastructure has been built for participation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindo. Miriam, huge appreciation to you and the panel from the audience for your inputs today, and a call for the respective organizations to find ways to partner, to work together, to strengthen the civil society voice and to hold local government to account. Thank you very much to all of you for your inputs today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm so sorry to stretch us all for time. We're slightly over, and I'm going to ask you for another 5 minutes to allow for Chris to please do the closing off. And thank you. Chris, if I can hand over to you. Thank you, everyone, from my side.
Thank you very much, Fatima, for the way that you've facilitated the conversation. I just want to thank everybody, but before I do that, I just want us to quickly go to Mentimeter. We want to get everybody's inputs, and you can anonymously make some comments. If you go to menti.com, those of you who haven't already, 616 is the code, so 616-18087, or you can just scan the QR code. And the question that's currently up there for you to answer is, what would you like, I suppose I need to share my screen, just give me a second. The question that's currently up there is, what would you like to see in the Code for Ethical Governance on the topics we discussed? Yeah, what is it that you'd like to see in the Code for Ethical Governance on the topic we discussed? And also, even if you think there's regulatory change required, what type of regulatory change would you like to see? If you can utilize the conversation and the platform to please just do that, and it's going to scroll up as we chat. You can see the code at the top there, so it's menti.com. And the code is at the top there. So while that's going on in the background, I really want to thank everybody for a fantastic conversation on quite a difficult topic. I think what we noticed is that this is a complex theme. It's not something that can be addressed overnight. It's that one of those things that when you start pulling at one of the strings, things almost tend to knot a little bit more than what they unravel. But I think we saw it from a number of perspectives today, and it helps us to understand things better. From the Ethics Institute and the team, the working group, and the advisory committee for the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, we will definitely be using the questions, the comments, and everything that comes out of this to inform our content for the Code for Ethical Governance as we go forward. Finally, I'd just like to thank Advocate Kenyile for opening, for Mr. Meyer and Ms. Van Donk for really facilitating the conversation in very brief time slots. And then also for the politicians and civil society representatives who came to the conversation and added very richly to what's being done. And it's nice to see a lot of the work and the thinking that's already going on around these topics. And then lastly, also Mr. Sigaba from COGTA, and also one of our partners on the working group for his input. So I think with that, I'd like to wrap up and say we will be having more conversations. As part of the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative, we are definitely going to be having more conversations around different topics as we try to understand the environment more and try to think about what should a code for ethical governance in local government look like. And yeah, we'll be reaching out to a lot of people and inviting you to our following conversations as well. So thank you very much. Have a nice weekend. Have a safe December and a good break. Thank you very much, colleagues. Go well.